The patrons have spoken, and watch out because this week, the Zangoose is loose. First introduced in Generation 3, those who played Pokemon XD will no doubt remember Zook's Shadow Zangoose, which was unavailable to snag at first. However, Zangoose's debut was as a version exclusive for Pokemon Ruby, and this crush-clawing Pokemon is famous for its ongoing feud against its counterpart, the Sapphire exclusive Seviper. One well-versed in Shakespeare might consider these two to be the Montagues and the Capulets of the Pokemon world. And today we're going to take on the position of the Bard ourselves as we tell our own epic tale of Zangooses in the competitive scene. And so we ask, wherefore art thou, Zangoose, and how good were thou actually? And in this video we'll be going over these competitive formats. Once upon a time, Zangoose was legitimately viable in its debut generation. In fact, it was more than viable. It was dangerous. When Generation 3 came into existence with the release of Ruby and Sapphire, there were 386 Pokemon in total. However, of these 386, only 200 were available in Ruby and Sapphire. Now, it earned this name retroactively, but that metagame came to be known as Ruby Sapphire 200, named for the versions and the number of Pokemon available respectively. And that was eventually shortened too, coming to be referred to as the 200 metagame, or simply 200. Many Pokemon known for their dominance in the complete Generation 3 OU, also known as Advanced, such as Zapdos, Gengar, Dugtrio, Aerodactyl, and of course Tyranitar, were simply not available. And that's because this was not yet Advanced OU, this was 200, and in 200, Zangoose was a force to be reckoned with. Normal Stab was a powerful weapon in 200, as it was a physically offensive weapon that wasn't easily stopped by the popular bulky Waters Milotic and Swampert. As such, Slacking and Dodrio were often seen firing off their powerful returns and double edges, and so was Zangoose, who had the incredible advantage of packing Swords Dance, which allowed it to rip through pretty much everything that wasn't a Skarmory. And Skarm was, of course, easily covered by Zangoose's trusty partner, Magneton. And the other normal types weren't so nigh automatic post-Skarm removal, as they still struggled to reliably break through the likes of other popular normal resists in Metagross, Dusclops, Solrock, and Registeel. After a boost, Zangoose ripped through them with greater ease, as they were likelier to fall in KO range. And Zangoose was more difficult to switch around since it wasn't locking into a move. Indeed, Zangoose's greater flexibility in ripping through these normal resists, thanks to the lack of reliance on choice span, was invaluable, especially since it was also far less prediction reliant. Zangoose didn't really struggle with a lack of immediate power either. After all, base 115 attack with high powered stab made it quite threatening against common neutral targets like Gardevoir, Heracross, Regice, and Ludicolo. Zangoose also had another incredible advantageous trait in its immunity ability, which meant it was completely unaffected by Toxic, making it even more difficult to stop for teams that relied on passive damage. For this reason, it didn't even need a Lumberry to rip through another popular normal resist, Sableye, and could opt for the understated but highly effective longevity of Leftovers instead, making itself more of a threat throughout a game in the face of light chip damage. Alternatively, it could make itself even more powerful with Silkscarf. Though it had more difficulty fitting it into its moveset, Zangoose's access to Quick Attack was yet another advantage over its fellow normal types, allowing it to pick off faster Pokemon like Alakazam, one of the most dangerous Pokemon in 200. So all in all, Zangoose was not the easiest Pokemon to make use of, as it wasn't exactly a paragon of bulk after all, but if one put the effort in, they would reap immense rewards. Sadly, this came to an end when Generation 3 expanded into the full 386 play, coming to be known as Advanced, thanks to all the non-Hoenn games that added to the meta, from Fire Red and Leaf Green, and Colosseum and XD. This faster, stronger new metagame was hostile to Zangoose in every possible way, and it could not keep up at all. There was nothing about this new tier that worked in its favor. There was no way it stood a chance against all of these teams that outsped it and destroyed it. Theoretically, Zangoose could do something against extremely slow passive teams, but so could many other Pokemon like Tyranitar that didn't come with the rather massive drawback of being completely worthless against the swarm of faster Pokemon that had come to characterize the metagame. Thus, Zangoose followed its Slacking and Dodrio's footsteps and disappeared from the tier completely. It wouldn't be finding a new home in UU either, but that at least was a compliment. It would have shredded the slower, frailer tier into a million little ribbons. UU was already Kangaskhan City, and though Zangoose was much frailer, the prospect of a normal type with Kangaskhan's speed, yet much higher attack and also Swords Dance, yikes. So Zangoose ended its tenure in its inaugural generation in the limbo of borderline, never able to find viability in Advanced OU. However, those that played the 200 metagame will remember, for it was a glorious tier in which the likes of Zangoose were not just viable, but legitimately threatening. Zangoose got several excellent power-minded toys in Generation 4. First, Life Orb was an item seemingly tailor-made for its hard-hitting, speedy aggression of a playstyle, letting it easily blast through frailer Pokemon without a boost and through bulkier Pokemon with one. Second, it was going to be able to pummel rock and steel types like never before, as it had received the best fighting type move in the game, Close Combat. Sadly, Zangoose wasn't going to be returning to OU anytime soon. In addition to the Pokemon that had previously made the tier uninhabitable for it, Diamond and Pearl had added several more powerful speedsters that ensured it wouldn't be making even the briefest of appearances. On the bright side, all of this power creep meant Zangoose was actually suitable for lower tiers now. It first tried to find a place in UU, but there was simply too much competition as an offensive normal type. Swallow had insane speed and power, Kangaskhan's great natural bulk was immensely valuable, Ursaring was even more obscenely powerful, and Tauros had a great mix of speed, power, and intimidate. Thus, despite not being out and out bad, Zangoose was outclassed and didn't see any usage in the tier. As such, it dropped to NU, and there it struggled. Though it had somewhat of a niche, its main issue was that Tauros was also NU and was one of the tier's very best Pokemon at that. Also roaming NU was Dodrio, making the most of its vicious new Stab Brave Bird and its superior speed, which it used regularly against the likes of common targets like Jinx and Magmortar, targets that Zangoose crucially missed out on. Licky Licky wasn't fast, but it was bulky and had an incredible move pool, including Explosion and the same Swords Dance that Zangoose wanted to use. Speaking of setup moves, Zangoose even had to compete with the hit or miss Belly Drum Linoon. Flawed though the latter was, it hit a lot more than Zangoose did. Even Slack King was arguably a better choice than Zangoose. This one was at least somewhat contentious, but it did pack unmatched immediate power, whereas Zangoose had more of a struggle against anything that wasn't full stall. It was basically a redux of the UU situation. Zangoose wasn't outright bad, just outclassed by a bevy of excellent competition. Now, at least in NU, the gap between it and its competitors wasn't quite as noticeable. It was a fun choice, but not the most competitively minded one. So overall, you'd be hard pressed to call Gen 4 a complete failure for it, but it certainly wasn't a memorable time for Zangoose. The 5th generation bestowed upon Zangoose a terrific new ability, Toxic Boost. It was essentially the same as Guts, but only for poison. Not that we're complaining, since to this day, Zangoose is the only Pokemon to have Toxic Boost as an ability, and something as cool as it deserves its own thing. Anyway, this new signature ability catapulted Zangoose to new levels of powerful normal stab, and it was now able to fire off super boosted facades whose power was just insane. For context, a Jolly Zangoose facade outdamaged Adamant Metacham High Jump Kick and Choice Band Druddigon Outrage. Suffice to say, Facade tore through pretty much anything that didn't resist it. Of course, plenty of Pokemon resist normal, but that's what Zangoose's coverage moves were for. And hey, those were beneficiaries of Toxic Boost too. Of course, the Rampardos theorem applies as it always does. Raw power is not everything, and as such, Zangoose was not able to ride its newfound strength to high tier success. But unlike Rampardos level Pokemon, Zangoose was quite naturally fast for something so strong, and as such, it was able to find its place in the lower tiers. Yeah, lack of bulk and resistances meant it fell to NU and so on and so forth. However, Zangoose was not constrained by its tiering placement. It was able to prove on several occasions that, if supported well, such as switch move using teammates to make up for its complete lack of defensive utility, it could be one of the most ferocious wall breaks in RU. It was nearly impossible to switch into it safely, even with the most dedicated physical walls. The mighty Tangrowth got blasted apart by Facade, and even physically defensive Steelix could be 2-hit KO'd by close combat. Really, the only answer was Spiritomb, which was a fine Pokemon, but not exactly the most popular one, and one that was highly exploitable in its own right. Zangoose's solid base 90 speed, the same as the tier-defining Moltres, meant it had plenty of opportunity to come in and start smashing everything in sight. It didn't even need to bother with Swords Dance, and so it didn't. It was able to fit Quick Attack into its last move slot, giving it even more utility. Though Zangoose never rose to RU proper, anyone who played the tier knew just how legitimate a threat it was. But Zangoose was NU, you say, and how did it perform there? Its so-called true tier, you wonder? Well, Respawn, it was pretty much equally fierce, for pretty much the exact same reasons. There were even shades of the tier above in how Zangoose's Facade 2-hit KO'd the monstrously bulky Eviolite Tangela, just like it had Tangrowth previously. Other physically defensive titans like Regirock and Alomomola were ripped through with similar ease, while Zangoose didn't have problems against offensive Pokemon either. Thanks to its useful base 90 speed, it outran plenty of big targets such as Sock and Rotom Frost. As for those faster Pokemon, they were often picked off from surprisingly high ranges by quick attack. For instance, Charizard took a whopping minimum 36.7%. Indeed, Zangoose was one of the tier's most defining, dangerous wall breakers. But you know what the most satisfying part of Zangoose's Generation 5 success is? The fact that it did so in spite of plenty of excellent normal type competition. All of Tauros, Kangaskhan, and Braviary were among the best in NU and were quite good in RU as well. NU also had Swellow, while RU also had Chinchino. For Zangoose to not just find a niche, but to thrive with all of these around, well, that was just special. The Tauros and Kangaskhan part especially. And so the 5th generation was a massive step up for Zangoose. The Gen 3 remakes would have been a great excuse for us to see Mega Zangoose fighting ferociously against Mega Seviper, and fortunately Zangoose was doing just fine even without a Mega, especially since its move to hit Ghost types was now the massively buffed knockoff, and as such Zangoose returned to NU with zeal. Once more it had to compete with Tauros and Kangaskhan, and once more despite the fierce competition, it established itself as a legitimate, ferociously effective wall breaker. Those two could only dream of pulling off the feats of power Zangoose accomplished at the drop of a hat. For example, cleaning one-hit KOing full health offensive Mesprit with Facade? Are you kidding me? Neither Kangaskhan or Tauros could come close to such a figure, even with several rounds of Stealth Rock. Yes, there's more to a Pokemon than its power, etc., but it was difficult not to gush when this level of strain came from something that shared Kangaskhan's highly effective base speed. Once again, even titans of physical bulk like Mega Audino were bowled over by Facade, but Zangoose did have one big flaw, which prevented it from being as splashable as its normal type competition. It was easily the least defensively useful. Tauros was able to get the jump on faster offensive Pokemon like Pyroar and Charizard. Another excellent normal type competitor, Swellow, was even faster. Of course, Kangaskhan shared Zangoose's speed stat, but Kangaskhan was much bulkier, and the ability to take a hit or two was quite valuable, whereas Zangoose's already minuscule bulk dropped to non-existent levels in conjunction with its self-induced poison. Still, even Zangoose had its own form of defensive utility in its powerful quick attack, which let it slam would-be offensive checks, most notably Jinx, who was KO'd after Stealth Rock. Zangoose's role was the most limited since its competitors' improved defensive utility tended to be slightly more useful than Zangoose's sheer wall-breaking heft. However, make no mistake, Zangoose's role was not just that of a theoretical powerful wall crusher. Its place in the tier was legitimate, and as such, Generation 6 was another success for it. Generation 7's power creep sent Zangoose hurtling down to PU, where it once established itself as a wall breaker of unmatched brutality. However, it once again faced plenty of competition. As always, Kangaskhan, but also a much improved Dojo. Once again, these Pokemon were no slouches in the power department, and while their other attributes rounded out a team's defensive integrity with in-battle options more effectively. As such, they were of course easier to put on a team. However, when it came to strength, they couldn't hold a candle to Zangoose, who smashed its way through everything that wasn't a Sableye. Sadly, the PU metagame often didn't require Zangoose's extra unwallable power and tended to favor the greater utility of its normal type competition. This isn't to say that Zangoose was bad, far from it, and its place in the tier was legitimate. It was just the most specific it had been since gaining Toxic Boost. Still, there was nothing quite like letting loose a Facade and just watching a neutral target drop, especially against one like the famously irritating Electros. And that's it. So how good was Zangoose actually? Well, it started out as a solid threat in the truly ancient, obscure metagame that was Ruby Sapphire 200, then disappeared for some time in the wake of a full 386 play, residing in Generation 3's BL tier, lest it rip UU to shreds. Zangoose then more or less took Generation 4 off, though it would hang on to that delightful addition of close combat for later. Finally, in Generation 5, Zangoose was allowed to shine, gaining Toxic Boost and becoming one of the most brutally powerful Pokemon in the game, and being fast for such a powerful Pokemon, which was a big part of why it was so threatening. Zangoose was a premier, vicious threat in Generation 5's RU and NU tiers, even in the face of plentiful, powerful normal type competition, and continued this Generation 6's NU. It slowed down a bit in Gen 7 PU, but even a slowed down Zangoose is one of the scariest Pokemon you can face. In fact, not facing it regularly can make it that much scarier when it does pop up. Overall, Zangoose has had quite a successful competitive history, and we can't wait for it to return and blast the lower tiers apart again. Thanks for watching, everyone, and thank you so much to our patrons for continued support of our videos and for voting for this Pokemon for this month's patron pick. And if you liked the video and you want to see more, be sure to subscribe to False Swipe Gaming for more weekly Pokemon content. And in the comments, I want to know, what do you think about competitive Zangoose? How would you buff it to make it surpass its normal type competition? Whatever it is, let me know in the comments, and follow my crew on these social media platforms. And that's all I got. See you next time, everyone.